Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to colleagues around the world. Thank you so much for tuning in to the second of these dialogues on decolonizing music and dance studies internationally. And we're coming to you today from a home in the community where we work with partners, and we will be talking about a social partnership in our ongoing work around this project. I will introduce the role players as we progress. My name is Brett Pyper. I'm the head of the School of Arts at the Wits School of Arts at the University of the Witwatersrand. Today, I have the honor really of sharing with you a set of musical and social relationships that I've been privileged to share as an arts practitioner long before I became a graduate student, and eventually focused on this community of practice for my PhD dissertation at New York University. And then subsequent to that completion, have been working in an ongoing way with this really special community of practice. And what we will be exploring today is ways of really thinking about the relationships between the subjects of research, and particularly ethnomusicological research, and the teaching and the research we do in university spaces. Today, other than last week's first dialogue in this series, focuses on a single case study. So we are going to be engaging with a range of stakeholders and role players within the project. As we proceed, you will hear that it's quite an ambitious project, and that there are in fact other aspects of it that we're not dwelling on in detail. For example, the musical research side of the project is present, but probably merits a conversation in and of itself. And our focus is not on theory per se, but in the dialogue between theory and practice, or indeed the notion of praxis, which I pick up from our esteemed colleague Samuel Araujo at the beginning of the presentation. So the way that we're going to structure this dialogue today is that after these brief welcoming remarks, we have a pre-recorded PowerPoint presentation that I put together. I should warn you that you are having my morning voice now, but by the time I got over the technical glitches, it was like 1 a.m. when I did the recording. So apologize for the night voice that goes with the PowerPoint presentation. And after the presentation, which ends with a video, I'll be introducing 5 special people who work in and around the Mamelodi arts community, particularly in the jazz appreciation space, as well as some of our students at the Wits School of Arts. So we will have 5 speakers. And after that, we will open for dialogue. Please could you indicate, as Carlos has already requested in the chat, that if you'd like to contribute a comment or ask a question live later in the session, that you indicate that. I'll be facilitating that, and we would really, really value your input. This is work in progress. Although we're excited and moved by a lot of the work we've been doing, we know that a lot of work remains to be done. We do so under conditions of, on the one hand, ongoing pandemic conditions. So I'm going to be wearing my mask when I move away from the screen. We are experimenting also with sustaining community arts practices under conditions of social distancing. And of course, this also comes to you from a South Africa as a place with a very violent and troubled history around precisely many of the questions we try to engage through this project. So it's a hopeful project. It's a project that has brought us much joy, but it is also a project that has to really reckon with much ongoing racialized violence in our own society and in the world. And we certainly don't intend to gloss over that, and look forward very much to your ongoing engagement. So Carlos, with that, I'm going to switch off my video and mute, and I would like to invite you to run the video. Thank you so much. Introduction. In his advocacy for shifting the politics of music scholarship, and he writes specifically here about ethnomusicology, our esteemed colleague Samuel Araujo has invoked the pedagogical legacy of fellow Brazilian Paulo Freire in emphasizing that, and I quote, musical processes and products are permanently mediated by power relations, demanding constant action/reflection, and not allowing stable theorizations in the course of part-time interactions aimed at individual authorships in search of academic authority. End quote. In renouncing what in most instances would be recognized as the normative mode of research in the global academy, Araujo foregrounds fundamental questions about the politics of research, the obligations of inquiry as action, and the risk of individuated appropriation underpinning academic authority. In short, he challenges many of the norms fundamental to how universities work and whom they serve. In the socio-political as well as the academic contexts in which the emerging case study we present today is located, these observations ring particularly true. You're looking at a photograph of our university, the University of the Witwatersrand, taken in 1933 when the institution was just over 10 years old. It's a picture that reminds me of the Hollywood cutout film sets of the time, set in the foreground against the backdrop of the city of Johannesburg, of course, the global gold metropolis at the time. I think about the juxtaposition of the Greek temple of the Wits Great Hall, and in the background, the upheaval on the landscape evident in the presence of gold mines producing artificial man-made hills called mine dumps. I think about the social and cultural equivalence of those upheavals in the collective consciousness. South African society continues to reckon with the legacies of the inflicted identities imposed by colonial and apartheid governments to divide and rule, as well as the distinct forms of racial capitalism propounded on the gold mine, with both state and capital drawing on the stable theorizations of folklorists and anthropologists of the time. Today, with the urban encroachment of the city all around that campus that was visible on the former photograph, these identities are reproduced beyond the formal dismantling of apartheid legislation in the early 1990s by the expedient mobilization of culture, as George Udice puts it, for the purposes of nation building, what goes as social cohesion, heritage promotion, economic development, international branding, and the like. Moreover, the constant action/reflection for which Araujo calls resonates strongly with activism to revisit and reimagine academic knowledge in its dynamic interaction with broader society. This process has been ongoing throughout South Africa's incomplete democratic transition, reaching particular intensity in the past 5 years as student protests peaked during what some termed the country's campus spring. And the photograph you see here was taken at the University of Cape Town in April of 2015, at one of the most iconic moments in this campus spring, the removal of the statue of the arch-colonialist Cecil John Rhodes. Amidst the iconic images of the time, played out on the steps in front of that very same cardboard cutout Greek temple that I showed earlier, where student protesters encountered a very particularly intense security clampdown. The shift, which Araujo characterizes as a move from assumed scholarly neutrality to one of politically cognizant engagement, centers on how responding to local community needs and demands has the potential to yield alternative research objectives and approaches, which hold the potential for opening up new disciplinary praxis. We offer the relatively recent, ongoing project discussed here as one such effort and would welcome critiques and suggestions. What came to be called Cosmology was conceived as an action research project inspired by Stephen Feld's book, Jazz Cosmopolitanism in Accra of 2012, and the associated albums and films recorded with the Anya Arts Collective in Ghana. Our project was originally planned as a week-long residency in which we would host 3 Accra-based jazz experimentalists and other members of the Anya Arts Quartet in Johannesburg. The music already produced would serve as the basis for an intracontinental but simultaneously pan-diasporic musical dialogue involving Wits-based staff and students, scholars and musicians, exploring how jazz cosmopolitanism has manifested in South Africa compared with Ghana and elsewhere. The performing group featured an ensemble of big band proportions comprising Wits undergraduate and postgraduate students, alumni, and lecturers. This ensemble was engaged as more than a band. It was conceived as a research project, with core members meeting online in the months before the concert to discuss the Ghanaian materials and explore research questions by means of performance. This ensemble came to be called the Cosmology Ensemble, since student organizers felt that cosmology was a less academic term than cosmopolitanism for public communication purposes. Also, that it echoes jazz titles like Charlie Parker's Ornithology and South African Zim Ngqawana's Zimology. The name affiliates the project with Sun Ra's expansive jazz-based explorations beyond earthly horizons within radical black sonic imaginaries that remain historically distinct from elite cosmopolitan form. Cosmology, moreover, has opened the project to embracing the multiple expressions of sociality and spirituality which our social partners have brought to it. When the physical residency, which was scheduled for March 2020, became impossible due to the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdown conditions led us to pursue the intended Pan-African exchange virtually by producing a live-streamed, socially distanced concert that showcased distinctive expressions of local jazz cosmopolitanism in response to the Ghanaian materials. Alongside the project of continuing the transcontinental musical dialogue, we were able to prioritize our ongoing work with our social partners in grassroots jazz appreciation societies, who remain relatively marginal to the largely neoliberal post-apartheid jazz public sphere. These practices provide rich social contexts for the music that we deem to be crucial to our academic mandate of studying, teaching, and publicly disseminating South African jazz culture in more inclusive ways. Having invited our social partners from jazz appreciation societies to be in the audience at our on-campus Wits Theatre, the concert presented at the end of October 2020 also became an exercise in mounting socially distanced performance under pandemic conditions, thereby assisting to develop ways of maintaining jazz appreciation practice in community setting. Our guests and co-performers were so inspired by the event that they formed a new network of community-based structures called the Cosmopolitan Collective in order to coordinate their ongoing collaboration with one another and the Wits School of Arts. This collective includes jazz collectors and appreciators, dancers, musicians, community radio and arts center practitioners, and educators. This network, which presented its first community concert in the township of Mamelodi on the 16th of December 2020, provides the basis for ongoing collaboration during 2021, hopefully including being able to realize the postponed residency of the Anya Arts Quartet. And here's a photograph of the Cosmopolitan Collective at its founding meeting in November of 2020. Some brief comments about the township of Mamelodi. of which you see an image now, as where it's located to the northeast of Johannesburg and east of the city of Pretoria, or Tshwane. And I will make some observations about forms of cosmopolitanism in this context. The discovery of unprecedented mineral wealth in the South African hinterland in the last third of the 19th century led to one of the world's most rapid and intense industrial revolutions, focused on Johannesburg but extending well beyond it, including to the nearby capital of the then Boer Republic, Pretoria. In a rapidly modernizing context in which culture was often invoked by competing settler authorities, British and Dutch descent, as a rationale to curtail African civil and political rights, material and performance practices became a notable resource for generations of urbanized and urbanizing Africans to articulate and assert their own senses of self. This often took the form of the adoption, but simultaneously the reframing, of the very globally circulating cultural commodities and practices that accompanied their dispossession and political subjugation. And so this could have included mission-based hymnodic singing, choral music, classical repertoires, but in this case also pertains very much to a very rich social history of jazz in this context. In short, these expressions amount to a form of non-elite cosmopolitanism from below. The work that we're doing together in the Cosmopolitan Collective aims to foster a transcontinental, intra-African, intergenerational dialogue about the ways in which musical processes have been specific to South Africa, while also reflecting general dynamics across Africa over the course of colonization. We aim to read, listen to, view, and study multiple expressions of African jazz cosmopolitanism. We aim to co-produce books, films, music recordings, and performances informed by interdisciplinary and collaborative dialogue between students, academics, and community-based musicians and jazz appreciators and practitioners. And crucially, with the latter being able to initiate and co-design projects and become active subjects rather than just objects of research. We aim to explore the affordances of multiple research methodologies, from social history to critical engagement with ethnography to action, practice-based, or artistic research approaches. And we aim to engage critically with the forms as well as the content of cultural expressions, including critically and creatively exploring alternative jazz festival formats. A brief glossary of terms that is going to come up in the brief video clip that will follow. I've already mentioned the township of Mamelodi, which is really the epicenter of the activities of the collective, although it extends quite broadly beyond that too. The city of Tshwane is the official municipal name now for what was historically called Pretoria. I've introduced the Cosmopolitan Collective as well as the Cosmology Ensemble. Diga refers to a practitioner of solo improvised dance associated with South African jazz appreciation societies, of which you'll be seeing examples. And one of our speakers refers to the practice of magodisano, which is a financial contribution to rotating credit mutual aid societies that are often used by jazz appreciation societies that sometimes also double as burial societies. And so there's a redistributive microeconomic model that's at work in these practices as well. But I'm delighted now to be able to introduce some members of the Cosmopolitan Collective.
My name is Khomotso Mushoki. I'm in the process of completing my doctoral research at the Wits School of Arts in the Department of Music. I've been working for a number of years with Prof. Brett Pyper, and part of our collaboration has involved teaching a course in the interdisciplinary arts and cultural studies, which has integrated some of Stephen Feld's work. And so when I engaged with him at the start of 2020, we were transitioning from having discussed Stephen Feld's work in the classroom, especially in relation to his concept of acoustemology, to seeing how we can then prepare for a type of performance-based kind of engagement with him, seeing that he himself has this relationship with academia, but also with the space of musical practice. And so at the start of the year, last year, 2020, we started discussing the possibilities of how it would work, and my role was to work on the integration of the residency of Stephen Feld in the School of Arts and the work he could do with the curriculum in the different departments where his work would be relevant and enriching for the students. Knowing that I also dabble between things that are administrative and artistic in the arts, Prof. Pyper sort of encouraged me to use the kind of work that I was already engaged in my doctoral research concerning artistic practice, to come into the project with that in mind and make some contributions and engage with this concept of this cosmology project from that angle. So it was fascinating. It became a very massive project which itself integrated numerous stakeholders from the academy and from the social spaces. We had to then start working with the jazz community from Tswane, and that in itself meant that the project became multi-layered in many ways. So it was no longer action research or just artistic research, but it was performance, and it was also very integrative of various perspectives of engagement.
Agere go vetsa re cosmology ba le rena e be re tla re cosmopolitan ke go tlhakana ha all provinces re ithuta le bana ke ra the young adults ya go vetse re ithuta le sekgowa se re tswele pele le bona nke ba re bontshe ka mogara dibuka ka re na go otlhe ne re no re jazz mara ho sna motho a itseng gore go kae ban re tlhakane le ba cosmology ba go vetse ke bona re berekisanang le bona jazz gona no ya tla ya gola ebile e tla ka mo dibukeng he ntse nako ya le bana ba tla bona gore hey batswadi ba rena at least ba hona mo dipampiring tsa di jazz tse.
Cosmopolitan e ruta le ntho ya witse about history gore jazz e tswa kae and then o batla go bona e le go kae as lenna as a composer my kind of composition ya no dia change ha ke sa composer in such a way gore ke accommodate batho ba itseng setse ke composer for batho ka ofela gore you accommodate both youth le the older generation.
Our aim is to grow jazz around Tswane, not only in Mamelodi, around Tswane. So Cosmopolitan would like to have as many jazz clubs as we can, but in the collective you only affiliate as a structure, not as an individual.
We are progressing, and we hope for all these years to come, everything must be okay. I'm really very happy about it because I'm collecting for many, many years. I've got all the kinds of jazz, and I'm happy about what's happening now. And God should bless Brett to what he's doing, because he has been doing this for many years, but right now it's happening, and it will be happening for many years.
The Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum is an affiliate of the Cosmopolitan Collective, a movement of jazz appreciators, jazz clubs, and other related organizations. In the Cosmopolitan Collectives, we also represent musicians, because as a Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum, we also deal with music. So we have groups, bands, music bands, which play live music, who form part of the collectives. When the collective is hosting events, our musicians also participate, and they play various genres of music, but in the collectives they play jazz. Some play avant-garde, others play rituals and vocals, bebop and Afro jazz.
And we want to wish this organization, a great future, because it has managed to do what many people or many organizations have not managed to. That is bringing together the education element in jazz. Hence the collaboration with the institution, the VETS institution, bringing back also the jazz clubs, or what you call jazz appreciators clubs, bringing back also the jazz diggers. So once you have that concept together, the world is your oyster.
My name is Tabarabo. I'm from Harangua. I'm a dancer, a choreographer, and a musician. And the reason why I joined Cosmopolitan Collective was the fact that I wanted to learn more about Diga as an art form, and then Diga as a movement, and then again Diga as a social cohesive movement that inspire and encourages people within a certain area in terms of muhodisano, in terms of music collections, in terms of education, in terms of jazz collection and artists and everything else.
We are the diggers. The motive of Cosmopolitan is to unite, to unite all the jazz fanatics around Pretoria, so that we can support each other. We diggers, we need to support the artists, and the artists are supposed to also support us.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlos. It's really, I'd like to just acknowledge the wonderful work of our team of videographers, Manyatsa Monyamane and Temba Vilakazi, who you saw a picture of there at the end in the stills, for the work they've done. So I'm happy we were able to give you a sense of the practice. And now we're going to really continue the spirit of dialogue, and it's a dialogue as much within our collective as with you as an extended audience. And I'm going to next give the opportunity to speak to Mfanufikile Motau, who you saw introducing the Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum. So as our chairperson, Brabiza Buthelezi, said, and I do want to acknowledge his role today as our host. In fact, I'm going to pivot the screen and I'm going to ask Brabiza just to wave. We are at his home, and we are really delighted to be able to kind of extend the spirit of hospitality and conviviality around the practice to you today. The secretary of the Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum is Mfanufikile, but he also, as Brabiza was saying, represents a structure within the collective. This is a collective that has brought together other pre-existing organizations. And one of them is the Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum, which is working in the heritage space as well as in music and other forms of arts education. So I'm going to give Aubrey an opportunity, as I get to know him many years ago, but Mfanufikile officially. He's a poet, he's a musician, and he's a community heritage activist. I'd love to hear Mfanufikile about what this project has meant for your organization and what your vision is for how it can assist in the work that you're aiming to do, also as a researcher.
Thank you. The Cosmopolitan Collective, as Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum, we really appreciate it because in our forum, we think that it will give growth, it will empower us in terms of arts, culture, and heritage, research, knowledge, social cohesion, and so forth. We are very much grateful to be part of this initiative as we are dealing with matters of the arts, culture, and heritage, music, theater, literature, dance, film, and documentary. And we have a very good relationship with the Wits University as we are going to work with them in terms of a project, Arts and Culture Legacy Project, to honor veteran artists in Mamelodi and beyond. We also have a good relationship with the Wits and the Cosmology about the book club. A book club is a part and parcel of the Mamelodi Arts and Culture Forum Literary Arts Department, where we meet, we read, and share books. There are authors. Some of the authors are published authors. And we also work with the traditional institution whose custodians are kings, queens, chiefs, and headmen. And we also work with matters of heritage. We are looking at infrastructure, matters of infrastructure. One of our plans is to establish an state of the arts, is to establish a state of the arts community arts center in Mamelodi. So the Cosmopolitan Collective will play a big role, a pivotal role in terms of achieving our goals. That's what it is.
That's really fantastic. And so I want to ask a kind of self-critical question, Mfanufikile, and that is just, you could be doing this work as you've been doing for many years in the community setting. How do you think the university can really be of use to you in this vision specifically?
The university can assist us in terms of on the academic level, because we have in the arts disciplines, we also run classes, arts classes, like music classes, theater classes, and dance classes. So I think through the Wits and the Cosmopolitan Collective, we might get assistance academically.
That's great. Thank you so much. So while we ask Mrs. Jennifer Maslangu to come around, thank you so much, Mfanufikile. I'm just going to emphasize that we received a proposal. I was very honored to receive a proposal from Mfanufikile to actually assist with a research project for a research agenda that had already been identified from their point of view, and being able to now visit their book club to be able to read together and to develop methodologies for this research together is something that I think we as an academic institution are also going to gain and learn by very much. So our next speaker is Mrs. Jennifer Maslangu, who I'm delighted to have in the screen now. Thank you so much for the lovely comments you made in the video, Sis Jennifer. And I was moved by you saying actually that you saw something important happening between generations. That on the one hand, bringing this experience of jazz into the books is important. But actually for us, it's also important to realize that all the knowledge that matters is not necessarily in books, but is often in the community and in these practices. So I think our audience today would love to know a little bit more about what does jazz mean to you? And how do you think that this partnership between the university and the jazz appreciation societies can really bring meaning and support to the community?
Morning, everyone. Jazz for me, it's a very important, because most of our young ones, they were normally saying jazz is for old people. So we're trying to bring this back so that our kids, they must follow the culture. Jazz is not all about old people. It's things that we grew with it. And in the struggle, people were singing the music of jazz. So we try to take this back to the kids. They say, follow the music.
Yeah, absolutely.
Follow culture, because of most our kids are now lost. So we try to bring them back into the community and then let them follow the elders to come and see what is happening.
So what I think is a wonderful role we can play as a university is simply to allow the dialogue within the community between generations to be happening. And it's been really lovely to see how many of the students who witnessed you dancing, and we had that lovely short clip of you dancing on the Bits Theatre stage. Some of them came from Mamelodi, but had not been part of this world before. And so you're saying that the importance is really for a dialogue within the community, but that the university can also assist with that. Oh. Thank you so much, and for the work that you do.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is the wonderful trumpeter and musician and educator, Mr. Prince Lengoasa. And he was a trumpeter in the Cosmology ensemble, but also you had some footage of him demonstrating his great footwork at the end of our concert there. What struck me was how many seasoned commentators on jazz who know you and your work well, Prince, had not seen you do Diga before, and they said there was a part of your work that came through in this project. So it would be really great for our audience to meet you and to just hear what your perspective was as someone who played in the band, who's witnessed this project, but I think it's also brought out your own Mamelodi roots at some level.
Absolutely. I think, the project has connected the dots for me in the sense that as a musician, people hear you play and, they get to hear some of the way that you think. But when they see you on stage dance to the same music, it's like, oh, so what happened here, And the whole thing about my roots being, having lived in Mamelodi is that I used to see in my growing people dancing to jazz. And I didn't know that I had actually been in school all this time, taking in all these lessons. And once I started doing it, it was like, oh, okay. So you've been learning, it's part of the heritage, it's a connection of generations. There's a generation that came before. Sunday afternoons in Mamelodi, people used to shine their shoes, barabadi bona, in preparation for what is going to happen in the afternoon at the stadium or in different jazz clubs. And this is in the 70s when I grew up in Mamelodi and saw this. And coming back now to this period and seeing how, you know, how much effect that has had on my own life, being able to dress in a particular way, being able to dance to this music and have a greater appreciation for it. Because listening to music is a great thing. Playing it is another level. But when you put all three together, you listen, you play and dance to it, it just gives a whole picture of where the music has to be and what the music does for one. So I'm really grateful for the project that it has exposed my other talents, but also that it has given me an opportunity to study, one, the music, the whole question of the dance as a digger, and being able to be a part of contributing to the success, but not only that, to, you know, to the cohesion of the whole project. So it's like playing three holes at one, and it took me by surprise to some level, you know.
Beautiful. So Prince, you are the single member at the moment on our panel who actually also played in the band, although I'm delighted that our colleague Salim Washington is in the virtual room as well, and I hope there'll be a chance to engage with him later. Can you maybe share with us a little bit of what happened in the actual concert? And you participated in both, the ones at the Wits Theatre and the one at the Ikageng Hall in Mamelodi.
Yes, yes. I think it was the coming together of great minds. You know, when we did the arrangement that, what's his name now? I'm really bad with names. Komoto's arrangement of Giant Steps, you know, that connected on many levels, in that there was a young group of students singing in SeTswana and Zulu to Giant Steps, which has been known. It's one of Coltrane's great tunes, but to hear it sung in SeTswana with a great arrangement like that, and people being able to connect that, oh, okay, this is also about us. Because once you start singing in a language that people understand, it brings that togetherness. And the spirit of the music became a reality, you know. And being with Prof, playing in the section, it was like being at home, making good music with seasoned musicians and younger musicians. So that whole thing about connecting generations becomes part of the deal. And the concert at Wits was a great concert because we were able to express ourselves, we were able to connect with one another in, you know, as we were preparing for the concert. And also coming out to Mamelodi and being in the audience, appreciating other people's music, and then saying, well, you know, this is how you guys appreciated our music. Hey, let me also put on my dancing shoes and be part of the whole experience. I think it's just been a beautiful experience, a learning curve, but also a time to get a perspective on the different things that are done with jazz. Jazz is like a staple diet when you look at it for people in Mamelodi, you know, the people in the East Rand. This is music that is loved by many, has been loved by many generations, and to get it to younger people and a younger audience is also very important, because then we start to write our own stories. We start to connect with different people on that level.
Thank you so much. And Prince, as we move to our next speaker, I'm just going to want to accentuate something Prince said that I think is very important as part of a discussion around a kind of decolonial approach, and that is that we've all taken different roles in being in the learning position at different times. So the authority of where knowledge lies keeps shifting and is very much a multi-directional conversation. So I'm going to introduce Pat Ranotto, who is in our video as well. And Pat, as a professional musician who also has been a promoter of jazz series, you have actually put together or helped lead this structure called DMC. Can you tell us a bit about DMC and where it fits in?
Yeah, thanks. Greetings to everyone. DMC stands for Digger Jazz Musicians Collective. So now you have been hearing this name, Jazz Diggers. Those are the people who dance to the type of jazz that they like. Mostly it's avant-garde jazz, although there are many types of the jazz they dance to. So now when we're watching all the jazz musicians play the avant-garde jazz music, then you see the dancers going on stage, dancing to that music. Then we realize that as musicians in South Africa, we can adapt the avant-garde jazz and mix it with township jazz so that now we can have the type of jazz that resonates with the jazz appreciators. Hence, we came up with this concept, or it has been there all along, called Digger Jazz. But now we said there are types of groups that play this music, but now they are not at that level, especially the school level, where you can say their music has grown so much that you can compare that to international music. But we said, I mean, having to try to adapt to international standards does not work for most of the people in the township, especially. So now let's go back down to the level of the listeners in the township, and even the musicians who have not received most of the educational aspect of jazz. Let them play what they've learned. And most of them, they've studied classical music. So let them adapt classical music into avant-garde jazz. Hence, they came up with this concept of Digger Jazz, which is avant-garde jazz, which is played very slowly in terms of the tempo. And that makes it possible for people, especially the jazz appreciators, to dance to it. And the beauty of the Digger Jazz is that you don't have two songs or one song that makes people to dance. The whole album, from the first to the last, once you start playing the first song, and once they start dancing, they're going to dance until the last song. Hence the concept Digger Jazz.
That's really
wonderful.
wonderful.
Lastly, like I said, we try to combine all those musicians who play that type of music so that we can have one collective, one association that caters for all of them.
And something that you said in the video that is really important for us who work in the public sphere locally is that it's brought together role players that have tended to be separate.
Yeah.
So the separation of the professional musicians from the dancers and the jazz clubs, it seems that this project is somehow, maybe it's because of the pandemic conditions or other things, we've managed to bring role players together within the community setting, even while the university is a partner in that.
Yeah.
What do you think is the value of that?
That I would say is a blessing in disguise, because many years ago, the very same jazz appreciators, jazz clubs, they felt that their music was not taken serious because most of the jazz festivals have diluted the music to include other genres. Hence, they went and retrieved into forming their own jazz clubs so as they can play into jazz venues on their own and play the music that they want. And then when we saw that happening, because they were playing CDs of international jazz groups, and even some of local jazz band members like Zingawana, Fairfax, you name Andile and that. So now we felt that this is a gap for us to really come closer to these people, be part of them, partner them. Instead of them every time playing CDs, we come to them to say, we play the music that you love, but let us come and play for you live, and then you buy our CDs. Because most of the time they don't charge at the door. So we felt that no, we didn't want to change their setup. So now we'll come with a live element, but now the monetary element, of course, it will be the CDs that they buy. So this has made it possible for us to create a synergy between the jazz dancers, the jazz appreciators, and the live music, jazz bands and jazz groups.
It's really wonderful and lovely to have you in this collective, in this conversation. Thank you, Pat. Our next speaker is Christine Msibi, who also wears various hats in this conversation. So Christine, I'm going to invite you to just actually introduce yourself and the work you do in Josie and Sign, and also what this project has meant for you.
Hi all. So I am a managing director of an organization called Josie Unsigned. And essentially, Josie Unsigned was born from the fact that I saw a really awesome jazz band performing at a club in Johannesburg. And I wanted to do whatever I could to get them heard and to get them out there. And then as a default of this, I came to learn that there were many independent musicians out there who sought help getting, their foot into the music landscape. And thus Josie Unsigned was born. And so now when I find myself as a member of this Cosmopolitan Collective and as a member of the Festival Studies group at WITS, it's all pretty much full circle, considering, like I said, that it was jazz that got me into working as a practitioner within the music space. And so for me, the Cosmology Festival that was hosted in October last year was a really powerful experience to witness not only the audience of the Digger Jazz and their community, who were a mystery to me in most parts. I had never seen Digger performed. I had never attended a jazz collection society, but I had, as a young child growing up, attended jazz festivals at Moderator Park and Mamelodi. I had been exposed to these people, but there was never any context. There was never any education around what it is that they're doing and why it's important. It was just, hey, we're here for fun with our aunts and mothers and what have you. So, many years later, to have been involved in this was a come to Muhammad moment, just to learn and to identify all the gaps in the space, all the gaps within the policies, the benefits that could come of bringing local audiences closer to local music, because that's another one of my real things that I'm trying to make happen, is that because I feel that South African audiences are very tuned into Western music, and they're sleeping on our own local supply. And so this project just gave me a vuma, a motivation really to continue with the work we're doing and to continue to bridge that gap between audiences, not only of jazz, just audiences, South African audiences, South African musical output.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Christine. Really valuable. So colleagues, our final speaker, and you will have noticed that we're shifting between registers today as well. Our final speaker will present more of a paper, and he is Oladele Ayorinde, who is a PhD student also at WITS in musicology. And I'm going to share his presentation now, and he will move over. But Oladele, please come and let me introduce you on camera as well before we share the screen. So what I just need to do is go to the PowerPoint. And after Oladele, we're going to open for general conversation. So we're ready, I think. Over to you. Thank you. And you can just click there. Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Oladele Ayorinde. I'm a final year PhD student in ethnomusicology at the School of Art. So my presentation is titled Decolonization, Not Another Academic Ritual, Notes on a South African Model for a Decolonized Music and Dance Studies. Yeah, as an entry point into my presentation today, I would like to start with a tale told by the Cameroonian anthropologist Francis Nyamjo, titled Blinded by Sight. The notion of blinded by sight explored where few blind men set on a mission to experience and describe an elephant. Each of them experienced the elephant from its standing location. In the process, they all experienced the elephant differently. When it was time to describe the elephant to their audience, they all described the elephant from their individual experiences of the elephant, as some spoke about the elephant's leg, some described its horn, and some its tail. Each of them felt so proud and got entitled to their description and achievement. To their listeners and audience, The description of the elephant was rather confusing, as they could not get a holistic understanding of the elephant, but fragments of it. This complexity was further complicated when each of them claimed to have represented the elephant. Well, in my own opinion, they are all right according to their experiences of the elephant. And they were all wrong because they did not provide a holistic understanding of an elephant. Oh, to my presentation now. Francis Inyamjo's Tales, Blinded by Sight, shines a theoretical light onto the complexities around decolonization and discourse that shape it. Here, the elephant in the room is decolonization in music and dance studies. The dynamic of decolonization in academia is a global challenge. Central to discourse on decolonization is the idea of representation, where scholars represent, in quote, the object of their scholarship in the academic markets. In other words, the decolonial enterprise seems like an academic ritual where culture is reproduced through discourse. In so doing, scratching the surface of the deeper issues of decolonization with little or no action towards pragmatic steps to achieving a holistic decolonized education, teaching and research, agenda, and methodologies. Therefore, what are the methods and ethics of pragmatic steps towards a decolonial music and dance studies? And how can we promote action-oriented decolonial dialogues, in quotes, through teaching and research and methodologies? This presentation engages these questions through a South African model for pragmatic steps to decolonizing music and dance studies. The Cosmology project has been represented at the beginning of this presentation. Hence, I need not to rehash or discuss it again. My focus as an outsider from within is to engage and reflect on the initiative and how it speaks to ideas around decolonization in the academia. I do this through the collaboration between Brett Pyper and the jazz veterans in Mamelodi and other members of the Cosmopolitan Collectives. Then I would like to open my discussion of the Cosmology project through a reflection from Brett, and I quote, "I wrote my PhD on the jazz appreciators to understand how jazz looks from their perspectives. More so, the digger jazz dancing and the DJing tradition of the SeTswana people and communities really merits recognition and a study on its own as a departure for a festival and learning opportunity for our students and a way of supporting people working in the communities and supporting the music. In my work, I am interested to know about those audiences who I knew in the 1990s and what the changes and opening of South Africa has meant for them. I joined Jazz Appreciators Clubs in 2005, and eventually I wrote about that experience in my PhD. My work is an academic work as it explores the social life of the practice and the people in terms of social and economic development. Also, it's about knowing about the people as it also needs to positively impact these communities. And that's the idea behind the Cosmology project, end quote. Brett's reflection points to pragmatic steps in refocusing the institutionalized canons that shape music scholarship. I think it is one of the many steps towards mitigating the problematic histories of South Africa. It is, therefore, a pointer to praxis of decolonization. As the Cosmology project shows, discourse around decolonization or decoloniality needs to be relocated in the community. it should be taken out of the four corners of academic institutions. It should not be an object of academic fantasization, structuralization. It is a conversation that must happen between the people and societies that we study and the academic institutions. The collaboration between Brett and the jazz veterans could be likened to an incomplete thinking about decolonization, which enables social transformation, a process that Francis Nyambio terms conviviality. And I quote, "Conviviality encourages us to reach out, encounter, and explore ways of enhancing or complementing ourselves with the added possibilities of potency brought our way by the incompleteness of others, never as a ploy to becoming complete, but to make us more efficacious in our relationships and society and sociality." End of quote. In the context of music research, Anthony Seeger calls this conviviality learning from doing, as it enables a co-produced knowledge that can mediate issues around local conditions. This notion of mediation is central to Brett's work with the jazz appreciators and the notion of cosmology. In conclusion, colonization is reinforced through discourse about it, through the things we do and how we think about them. The Cosmology project makes a practical example of decolonized teaching, research, and methodologies in music and dance studies. This is because the conviviality of Brett's collaboration with the jazz veterans blurs boundaries and solidifies social connections and human relations, which provide the basis for social transformation in post-1994 South Africa, an example of a troubled society. Therefore, to decolonize music and dance studies is to decolonize ourselves by rethinking and changing institutionalized ideology that shape our practice, teaching, and research. As Francis Nyambio asks, can we have a convivial music and dance studies? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oladele. Wow. Okay, so colleagues, that brings us to the end of the formal input side, and we really welcome your engagement as we go forward. I will ask anyone who'd like to make a comment or ask a question to indicate that in the chat. I do see, though, that our esteemed colleague and collaborator, Professor Salim Washington, is in the conversation. Salim, would you like to add anything from your side as I start working through the chat? Oh, Salim has had to leave us, unfortunately. Okay, too bad. Colleagues, let us have a look. So I have the chat open, and I'm seeing lots of kind comments. But as Oladele appropriately said, we do this from a place not only of the incompleteness of others, but the incompleteness of self. And you know, this is a learning project. So maybe one of the places for me to start, just kicking off, thinking about what speakers have said, is that it's been really important for us to be able to emphasize the ways in which roles have shifted in this project. Musicians become teachers, jazz diggers become sources of knowledge rather than objects of study. My own role as an academic is really very much more about curating and facilitating intra-community conversations across generational lines, as much as it is about discursively translating that into scholarly texts. Would anyone like to, we can take comments in the chat, but we could also raise our hands and take, and you know, actually just vocalize any comments or questions if anyone would like to exercise that option as well. I'm looking out at the moment and not seeing any hands go up, but let's see. Suibeng, yes, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, for sharing all your experiences about decolonizing music and dance studies through the Cosmology project. I'm very appreciative of all this, the sharing, yeah, because I learned quite a lot about the project. But my question is, like, what are some of the challenges that you faced, especially regarding the decentering of power hierarchies and the hegemonic structures that you face in South African society? Yeah, could you comment about that? Any of the speakers will, do that. Yeah.
So everyone around the table, the question is, what kind of challenges have we faced in building this project? So I'm going to swivel. I'll also give it a shot at the end, but Oladele, would you like to come up with something first?
Okay, thank you very much. In the process, I think there's some, as a person, as an incomplete.
Would you like to introduce also why you call yourself an outsider within?
Okay. I use the term an outsider from within to start with. I'm from Nigeria. I'm from Lagos. I've studied for like 5 years in South Africa. I'm doing my PhD now at Wits University. So my process is more like, I'm part of the project, but not within the context. I wasn't shaped by South African history. Hence, I am an outsider from within. So for me, it's also a form of conviviality and incomplete. So to the question, in the process of the research, I noticed a lot of things, and I learned a lot also as a scholar, as a researcher. One of those things is trying to wear the cap of a participant and also the cap of a scholar, an observer. So on that note, I was observing the relationship between Brett and the other colleagues. So what I noticed on many occasions for him is his positionality within the entire discourse as a South African. So there was a time I asked him, no, I acknowledge indirectly. I told him, and I will quote, I will use that phrase again. I appreciate the way you decenter power in this process. You tend to leave everything for us to decide. You hardly take any decision without our own contribution. And that, I mean, in the process, Brett calls everyone, what do you think about this? And in most cases, it leaves the decision-taking process to us. So for me, that's quite an important lesson which I learned in terms of research and trying to acknowledge one's position in a case or context like that of South Africa.
Thanks a lot, Oladele. That's interesting. Wow. Prince, I wonder if we can talk a bit about the challenges of actually preparing a concert like this at times that, it wasn't safe to meet. The vocalists rehearsing those exquisitely delicate close harmony arrangements had to work on Zoom actually up until a certain time, and then had to be taught to sit much further apart than one usually sits on stage. Can you give us a bit of a musician's perspective on the challenges we've had to overcome, and again, the politics of that?
Well, it being a time of the COVID and social distancing, learning from one another from a distance has become part of what has to happen. But I think it was a challenge in that parts had to be sent to people long before time, people rehearsing on their own. And it was an interesting process because that way we learned to learn from one another without being in the same place. And then when we get together, we're able to, rehearse the music, go through the parts, and it was beautiful at the end to see it all come together. But also being in the same room, trying to keep the distance. It's a new thing, When we met at rehearsals, you want to hug people because you haven't seen them in a while, and then you remember the president said we have to do this new elbow handshake, So the love was there, but it was also kind of constrained. But at the end, it all worked out because the one aim was to make the music happen, and we were able to present a great concert.
Absolutely. So Christine, you are on the organization team behind the concert. You know how much happened backstage to get people safely onto campus, to market this event, to deal with the logistics. I mean, what were the struggles? I mean, let's face it, universities are not easy places to access at the best of times, let alone under a pandemic. So, what did this actually involve from the organizational point of view?
From an organizational point of view, it took a lot of, it was almost like the beginning, because it was the first time we were in this set of circumstances. It was the first time we had all of these challenges to consider on top of just ordinary project practice, so we had to get our jazz appreciators from Mamelodi to Wits. We had to make sure
ID numbers.
That was a process too, because ordinarily you could get them on a bus and get them onto campus, but then in this case, because they wanted to make sure that everybody was contactable after the fact, we needed ID numbers, contact numbers of audiences. So that was a bit overwhelming. And then the theatre had to be set up in such a way where it was socially distanced in some parts, and it could only have a 50% capacity audience in it. And so there were all of those really bureaucratic kind of problematic, pesky sort of things. But at the end of it, I think that the learning, and especially from what I hear took place in Mamelodi at Ikageng, was that transfer of skill from what happened at Wits, the jazz appreciators took that on and they applied it like to a T by the sounds of things in Mamelodi. So that was a really impressive turn of events. And more than anything, in fact, it almost feels like they say that when women have babies, it's a really painful experience, and then, but then they want to do it again. And I feel like I actually don't really remember those challenges so much because of the impact of the power of the actual concert, because of the impact and the power of this engagement. And if anything, it's the highlights that stand out more for me. And yeah, so that's been really impressive.
Lovely, thank you so much. I mean, I'd love to hear from our jazz appreciator and digger partners what your challenges were. But I mean, maybe I should just add that what I certainly knew we couldn't be sure of in advance of the concert was whether the chemistry and the magic that happens at a jazz appreciation session would work, because maybe people would be so self-conscious in the highly formalized academic space that it would smother the creativity and the spontaneity. In fact, the real challenge was, how do we marry a practice that's all about improvisation and spontaneity and spirit to all those structures that you've just described, needing to be able to do contact tracing, needing to be able to manage a safe event. And I honestly didn't know whether anyone would dance, because we know at jazz appreciation sessions, it doesn't always happen. The spirit has got to be right, the sociality has got to be right. But almost from the very start, people started moving onto the stage, and there was this magic and this interaction between the musicians and the diggers. That could not be guaranteed. That could not be controlled. And if we were to do it again, maybe the music, the spirit, how people felt in the moment would be different. And so there's something about not trying to control too much, Oladele. It's very interesting you say about letting go of control, although there is a responsibility that comes with that. Very interesting. I see there is a question or a comment from Gisa Yenshin, and thank you, I'm going to read it. Here's my question for everyone to see. We all deal with music. Do we not feel how important audio quality is in these meetings? I'm afraid this is not alarming enough. Next thing, would you all work together if there would be a project leading to it? I think that music always goes ahead with and without research. Isn't it also a part of decolonizing to change this kind of project-bound thinking in research? It's really an important point, Gisa. I don't know if you'd like to even elaborate on that verbally. What I understand you to be saying also is we're working with the affordances, but also the constraints of Zoom for exchanging sonic knowledges. Is this your point? Indeed, and of course, we are also learning how to maybe be more sonically effective and communicative, and indeed decolonize, and not just seeing the platform as neutral, Yeah, exactly. Again, Oladele is saying it's an incomplete process. Very good point. Bongani, I really appreciate your question and nice to have you in the conversation. How is your relation with your audiences affected in the spirit of time we live in? Is the liveliness of your jazz performance affected? I'm going to ask the group before I give my own answer. So, and I think Bongani is referring to the pandemic time, but also where South Africa is right now. What is the relationship of this project with the state of the world as we are experiencing it now? Would anyone like to give that a shot? And Simpiwe, you're also very welcome as a student in our conversation. What does it feel like to be doing something that's as palpably joyful at a time that the world is not in a good place, and the social fabric of our own country continues to tear often on a day-to-day basis? Prince?
Well, I think music has always been a place of hope, or a way of keeping people hopeful, We express different feelings and thoughts through music. And it has always been part of who we are, whether it's a death, whether it's a birth, whether it's a celebration of any other form. Music has always played a great role. So I think when we interact with people on these platforms, they are able to keep hope alive, There's a song that Winston wrote, he called it Give Peace a Chance. And I think we can keep giving peace a chance. We can keep giving hope a chance by being able to communicate with one another and make music from different parts of the world. We need to keep our spirits together. We need to keep our spirits high in order for peace to be given a chance. So this pandemic should not stop us from showing each other love.
Oladele?
Okay, thank you very much. Again, I'm going to wear my hat as a scholar to that question. And now I'm going to use the term again, the role of conviviality in this process. The world is sick. The world, people have been limited within their own room and trying to relate across the world from their own domain. Mobility has been impaired by the pandemic and the strands of news flowing around the world. So people are afraid. And a time like this, a project like this, creates a kind of conviviality that blurs boundary, that creates a kind of healing process. As we have seen in the video, the forms of dancing that emerged during the concert wasn't planned. That is the role of conviviality. That's the kind of spiritual terms, that's the kind of spiritual power it brings in place. So it blurs the thinking process, the fear, or COVID-19, and it just opens everyone up to their own, to connect again, both directly and indirect. So it creates a moment of expression, a moment of freedom, a moment of hope, and a moment of peace, like Bra just said now. So thank you very much.
Anyone like to add? Simpiwe, yes, just project.
Yes, I think for me, for starters, the project was coined as a public humanities anthropology event. So at the back of my head, that thing of trying to forge that balance or that ecology between the music, the people, and the space, given the dynamics or the new reality that we are subjected to. So I think cosmology as a theme also really challenged us to think outside the box and really try to, build a synergy or an ecology more than trying to play a role. It's like we're trying to catch the energy in the space to say, is the energy really moving as per the objectives of what we're trying to achieve? So it was it was daring, of course, but I think for me it was a learning experience, and I appreciate the kind of people that were part of the team, because I saw how Tate Prince was with Tate Salim, the conversations in between the rehearsals, like I got to witness synergy. I think that's what I can say.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to see if we've got any other questions. Do keep them coming, colleagues. That's really good to see and hear. I should also acknowledge that Msibi, who just spoke, was the member of our jazz, our festival study group who put the suggestion on the table to turn cosmopolitanism into cosmology, but it ended up being a very productive line of thinking to go with. So, I mean, obviously, from my perspective as someone who's academically employed, the challenge of this kind of work is to ensure that without abrogating one's responsibility, that one decenters, the distribution of knowledge, and to really facilitate the creation of a space where precisely those interactions could happen that Msibi spoke about. As I've said, with respect to the dance, the same would happen in a seminar setting or in a classroom setting or whatever. You can't guarantee the exchange of knowledge. You've got to try, in a sense, to invoke this really helpful concept of nyamjos, of conviviality. I really want to thank Oladele for this. Learning happens best when people are at ease and are actually joyfully engaging, and can't be fully controlled. So at the base of this whole project, I suppose, is to say, how can we make sure that in a society that is struggling in many ways with questions of social justice and racial justice and gender-based harm and so on, to dare to do work in the public domain that creates opportunities for these kinds of joyful exchanges. Any other questions or comments? I mean, what is interesting for us as people who often deal with the specificities of South Africa is that this is a global platform, so we really value the chance of thinking outside of our context. I see Don Miles has responded. Zoom has, for me at least, become a liberating force, allowing me to hear about a great project from smart, articulate people. Surely there are challenges, time zones, audio and video dropouts, etc. But we can get together and share like we really never have been able to before. Thanks to all for contributing to this important experience. I must agree, Don, and what I have to really say is that, again, speaking as someone who attends ICTM meetings and has the privilege of attending because I have an institutional base, I am able today to share this ICTM platform with students and community partners without whom my research would be meaningless, who would never have access to the long-haul flights that would take us to ICTM meetings. So particularly from locations in the global South, working with the new forms of access that this enables for us is very empowering. I think it's a great challenge, though, that Gisa has given us to see what we can do with making this more of a hi-fi kind of experience as well. Any other, Suibeng, can the presenters comment a bit more about the South African elements in the jazz cosmology? Is this an element of decolonization? Very interesting question. So what is decolonial about jazz in the South African context? And Suibeng's question is really productive. When I speak about my jazz research to colleagues elsewhere in Africa, we actually have discovered this in our study groups. Members from elsewhere on the continent say, why are you interested in jazz? This is an elite Western music. It's associated with corporate and government elites. What is transformative about this music? So what is transformative about this music in the South African setting? Who'd like to give it a go? Pat, do you want to give it a try?
It's not an easy one. Thanks once again. Yeah, like I said before, having to watch people dancing to this music that they call avant-garde mostly. So we as musicians had to come up with a simple way of interpreting the very same music so that it can be understood by people who have never gone to school, who do not have an educational background, especially when it comes to musicology. So now, most of the musicians, like I said, their basic knowledge was, the entry point was classic music. With me as well, I studied classic music through the Royal, London School. Exactly. So I studied jazz later on, but now I still had that background of classic music. So now when I moved from that classic music to jazz and learning different chord progressions that one will see or find in jazz, I realized most of my colleagues couldn't go to that extent of learning what I've learned. So they've stuck to the classic music. So what they've managed to do is to adapt the very same classic chords, the basic classic chords, into jazz. That's what I said earlier on about this digger jazz. You take classic music, you marry it with avant-garde jazz, it gives you something different. Because now at the end of the day, the element is for the jazz diggers or the jazz dancers to dance to that music. The aim is for them to dance. That's why we say it's digger jazz, from the first song to the last song. That is something that is not easy for many people. You know, especially many musicians, you'll have them recording different kinds of jazz in one album, African, you name them. And you find that avant-garde is only two songs in there. Exactly the point that you made, Brett, that when we were at VETS, it was very difficult for people to go on stage and dance because they needed something that is resonant with them. Mm. And then as soon as they had a certain type of music, like, was it Joni, Gianni, or
Ayorinde was playing.
Exactly, it's more avant-garde. Then people start going on stage. So that is why we've adapted the very same element to take it to people who have not gone to school, but who have studied classical music, to merge those two, avant-garde jazz and classical music, and make it digger jazz so that now people can dance.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Would anyone else like to elaborate? Simpiwe?
I think for me, it was the element of interrogating socio-economic and geopolitical divides, because I come from Emalahleni, where a man who lives in a shed organically appreciates jazz and follows jazz. And there's the Standard Bank Joy of Jazz, which is a corporate elite kind of an event. So the Cosmology project's aim was to try and forge an equilibrium in terms of experience as jazz, not as classified jazz. So that was the attempt of the Cosmology project, to say, this man takes out his money and spends, buys the music, follows the culture, understands the dynamics, however, is not part of the elite Peter Clady's activities. But then this is one community that has a divide because of socio-economic and geopolitical reasons. So the aim of the project is really to try and, forge that cohesion between these kind of appreciators, because it is about the jazz.
Are you wanting to come? Mfanufikile?
Yeah, what I can say in terms of jazz, in terms of decolonizing jazz in the South African context, the question would be, where is the point of departure? Because when we speak about jazz music, it encompasses many different elements. When it comes to singing, when we speak about decolonization, perhaps you say vocals, lyrics, African or mother tongue, we should use mother tongue or mother language. When it comes to the instrument, instead of playing piano, perhaps you should play marimba, because we're decolonizing marimba, that would be praised the piano as a Western instrument. Instead of playing guitar, which is a Western instrument, perhaps you might play kora or marimba. as jazz in the cosmology, speaking about the cosmology, the word cosmology itself, the origins and the nature of jazz. Because the understanding that jazz is African music, its origins, like in South Africa, if you can listen to the traditional dance and music, in SePedi, they call it Dinaka. That is part of the origins of the South African jazz. Also, another element is the element of clothing. In most sessions, jazz sessions, where there are the Stockfells, where there are jazz appreciators dancing to jazz music. Most of the time, the music which is played is Western jazz. They don't play African jazz. The clothes, the kind of the dress code is not African. It's what they're promoting, Western clothes. You know, maybe the point of departure. Perhaps we can start looking there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, first of all, I would like to explain or make a point that the concept of jazz is actually might not be the same, or it has a different connotation across Africa. And so in South African context, it also has a different connotation. And like we all know, South Africa, jazz has been part of, has been an important tool of aspiration in South Africa since the apartheid era, since 50s, 1960s. It's important. There has been important engagement from the grassroots down to the mainstream, trying to reconceptualize what jazz. Why there is mainstream, there's a lot of there has been a lot of local contextualization, and that is what I think shaped our idea of cosmopolitanism from below. So that challenges the mainstream notion of jazz as Western. That's one. Then the second layer is that by its very nature, the South African jazz since the 1950s and the 60s, and those that practice and perform jazz in South Africa, they have decolonized many years before the term decolonization enters the academy as a currency. Mm-hmm. They have decolonized years before. And so does many, the same has also happened across Africa. So the notion of jazz in Africa, first of all, is not the same to the mainstream understanding. That's one. The second layer of it is that the practice, the social composition and aesthetic composition of the form is quite different to mainstream understanding. As you have seen, the Digger jazz itself is a South African composition or making of jazz. It's a form. It's as it has been explained in this presentation. So we can now say jazz is not a cosmopolitan phenomenon as we used to understand it. So it has different connotation and approaches, across the globe itself. And from the African perspective, particularly South African, it's a form of cosmopolitanism from below, as we have explained in this presentation.
Thank you. That was a very generative question. Prince?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think jazz is a language, and there are lots of dialects to it. In South Africa, when you look at it from the 40s up to now, jazz musicians have spoken this language, but also started their own language based on the American jazz, because that's where it comes from. Some of us play Louis Armstrong, but extend it to our own context. We had people like Mangungu Ngozi, who could play like Coltrane and Win Shorter all in one, but he had his own voice as a tenor saxophonist. You had Zim Mawana, So throughout the generations, people have had a take on American jazz, but did a South African thing. When you think about the Blue Notes, Chris McGregor and all those brothers, already in the 60s, they were playing jazz like the Americans, but then they had their own voice. People used to go to London, jazz musicians from America used to go to London to listen to the Blue Notes, because there's an element of, yes, this is the language, but you also speak it with your own accent, you know? So when you listen to a solo by Winston, and then you listen to a solo by Coltrane, sometimes you want to ask, I mean, I know Baby Koza once said he was in the States and they were listening to a recording done by Winston Mangunkungozi. And one of the guys was saying, man, this is one of Coltrane's recordings I've never heard. You listen to a person like Banira Chabani. It's like the Charlie Parker of South Africa, but he does not only stop in playing bebop, he does kanga bop, which is bakanga with, you know, a touch of bebop. So I think in terms of, as you said, South Africans have long changed, decolonized jazz. I know on many occasions, guys came from the States, Winton and other people playing with their bands, and they've said, the South Africans have a feel like the people back in New Orleans, you know, back in the US. So that we have gotten into the music and made it our own by understanding what it is and then moving it into our own situation, our own interpretation, and our own compositions and playing. So yeah, it's long been taken care of, but it needs to be forwarded more, because the younger generations also, I mean, they're great players who are recorded now by companies in the US. You think of Duduzi, you know, a lot of the brothers are doing this on a level that says, you have spoken this language long enough to have your own dialect.
Interesting. Let's see if there are more comments. So lovely to see colleagues chiming in. Carlos, oh, okay, there's a, oh yeah, just to say, everyone, please could you stick around at the end of our session to take a group picture. We've still got 20 minutes, but that'll be great. So I want to acknowledge my colleague Zanele Madiba, who is in the room, and as you would have seen from our closing slides, this project would not have been possible without the support of our Arts Research Africa project in the Wits School of Arts, which is supported by the Mellon Foundation. Temba, our wonderful videographer, co-videographer, you said that each took turns to learn. You're interested to hear from the panel, at what point can we start seeing things like terminologies representing all forms or structures? Like, how do you unpack cosmology in SePedi or SeTswana? That's a fantastic question. So if we were to be finding conceptual bases in indigenous African languages that are spoken in the jazz spaces we're talking about, how could that unlock some understandings? Temba, thank you for the lovely question. Let's hear if anyone wants to respond to that. Let's take Oladele first, and then I'd love to hear also from some of our other speakers too.
I think that's a brilliant question. Thank you very much. But I also need to, I'm glad you were part of the concert process, the process. So the jazz step arranged by Cosmopolitan, I think that should be a response to your question. Arranged in Pedi and what other languages? And Zulu. So simple. It's as simple as that. That's an entry point. Don't forget, I said earlier, this is an incomplete process. We'll keep working on it. It's the mediation process. And part of that mediation is trying to localize all these big grammars into the local context and languages. Thank you.
I would love to hear, would anyone like to speak to the spiritual side of jazz in this space? Because this is where maybe finding indigenous concepts for cosmology starts to take us.
Yes, I think Malombo jazz is a spiritual music because it's a fusion of both Venda and SePedi spirituality. Yes, Malombo music by Philip Daba. That is spiritual. That's what I can say. And in terms of colonizing, if you may allow me to go back, I will not totally agree with Oladele and Brother Prince. When you say the long decolonized jazz, which element, which part? Do you mean the sound? But what about the instrument that produces the sound? Is it African or is it a colonial sound? Is a Western instrument? I don't agree with that. But Malombo is a spiritual.
So this is, I mean, it's great that this is a debate. It's not a resolved set of questions, and it's part of what we work through in this project. Yeah, absolutely. Would anyone have a SeTswana or SePedi or isiZulu or South African word that we would take to be the equivalent of cosmology? What word would we use?
I think it should have origins and nature as like something that shows originality of indigenousness, because cosmology is the study of origin and nature. So in the context of indigenous people or African people, what is it that is original and what is it that is natural?
Yes, Malombo, because Malombo is African spirituality. When they say somebody got Malombo, means he or she has been possessed by the ancestral spirits. So Malombo is an ancestral spirit. Is in SePedi and in SePedi Malombo.
And am I right to say that part of the significance of this music we call jazz in South Africa is that it also connects with this domain of ancestry and spirituality? So that's not easily visible to people looking from outside who only know jazz from a commercial point of view.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I like your entry point, actually. But there's something I also need to draw our attention to another layers of this complexity. And I mean, the notion of locality or trying to localize this idea of jazz. The first and foremost, the jazz by its very nature is cosmopolitan in nature. Yeah. And sorry, I want to stand for you to see what I'm wearing today. I am an African, though, from Yoruba culture of Nigeria, southwestern Nigeria. By tradition, I should be wearing agbada, a wide gown, with that royal regalia. But here I am today, wearing an American package shirt and British package jacket. And you two, can you please stand and let me just So the process is that there is no how will I put it, authenticity. So your question is pushing us towards the notion of authenticity, which I don't think it exists anywhere. Even before colonization, like John Apadurai has actually instructed us or allowed that there has been intercultural and exchange of culture thousands of years before colonization. So where do we put that? So what we call Malombo is also as a kind of extension in other African countries and across the ocean also. So we borrow, we shape each other in a complementary ways. I can't say I am a pure, this is an authentic Yoruba culture. It doesn't exist anywhere. Yeah, it's a form of incompleteness. We are all incomplete. Thank you.
So this is so lovely because actually the conversation has become the kind of space of debate and learning that the project endeavors to be, right?
Yeah.
Tamba, thanks for such a generative question. Stefana, would you like to ask your question, please? And if you'd like to ask it live, that would be lovely.
Yes, I will try to do it. As you quoted in the beginning, Samuel Araújo,
yes.
I am curious to know if you are aware of his, not his, but one of the collective that he is a part of, which is the Musicultura Collective, which is also a collective of research, or community-based research and archiving set in favela, in maybe a variant, the Brazilian variant of a township in Maré. And have you ever thought of maybe collaborating or connecting with them, because they also tackle similar issues of social injustice and racial injustice, and they also they play music together in this group. So I thought maybe, yes, it's a good point to connect.
Thank you so much, Stefana, for your question. It's I promise you it's not scripted. So I admire Samuel's work so much. I had written to him knowing that it's a terrible time of the morning in the Americas right now. We are indeed talking about building a collaboration, not only university to university, but to connect our collective with the collective in Rio through Musica Cultura. So it's another example of what this kind of platform that the ICTM provides can help us do. If any of you are involved in similar projects where you are, we would love to reach out to people doing similar work and to be able to enable peer-to-peer conversation between musicians, between practitioners, in community settings, as well as in this kind of academic project. Thank you. Palesa, yes, thanks. Lovely to see you with us. And Palesa was another member of our festival study group who was mobile between locations at the time we were planning the event. And Sui Beng is reminding us that Musicultura will be presenting later in the year as well. So really lovely that this set of dialogues points in that direction. Anything else, colleagues? It was really lovely to see how generative the question was. And of course, what Mfanufikile is arguing is that jazz could be more African. On the other hand, Oladele is saying, let's acknowledge that there isn't one understanding of Africanness that carries authenticity. And in the South African setting, and this is part of my answer to the question of cosmopolitanism, you know, the scholars who founded South African jazz studies, the elders on whose shoulders I stand, so it's writers like David Copeland and Christopher Ballantyne and Gwen Ansell, these scholars have noted a particular predicament in South Africa, which perhaps has made jazz such a powerful vehicle for decolonization or anti-colonial struggle from you know, really early in the 20th century. And that is, you know, the particular way that the apartheid system appropriated notions of indigeneity, of tribal identity, and forcefully and violently re-tribalized urbanized Africans who spoke multiple languages, participated in multiple registers of musical exchange, and told them that they had no place in the city and that their homes were in so-called homelands, and reduced to a very narrow understanding of culture. So the fact that forms of African musical sensibility could be asserted through jazz meant that there was a way of affirming one's African roots without playing into the apartheid system's retribalization ideology. But we are now out of that phase in Mfanufikile, which is interesting. And that's to say, you know, could we be expecting, can so-called indigenous music that is pre-colonial, if there is such a thing, that we could access, is that maybe a music that needs to be given more space now. So that will be an interesting dialogue as the project continues. So I'm seeing, oh, and it's so delightful to see my colleague Chantal Willie-Peterson in the conversation. So Chantal was one of our co-musical directors, along with Andre, who's her partner in life and in music. And Chantal is unable to be with us in Mamelodi today, but she's in the conversation. And let's look at her contribution in the chat. This project was a powerful experience of music making, which took on a simultaneous and almost symbiotic sharing with audience members who were also gifted dancers. from the onset of this concert, a sort of decontextualization of Chantal's norms occurred. Histories and storytelling merged in musical sound as each dancer sought an intentional way to share his or her meaning while occupying or situating themselves among a strong sense of musicality in this performance model. The concert felt like an easy negotiation through an invisible balance of common goals, with the tension of the unknown and the release of control, allowing the unexpected or unexperienced to be sought through an authentic moment of openness and a common search to find each other, musically, personally, individually, and relationally. This, for Chantal, was sound and music and movement working together to strengthen norms that historic and emerging dialogues impact. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for this very thoughtful comment, Chantal. I mean, I was moved after the concert to hear you and Andre, as colleagues who teach jazz in our music department, voicing how much you had gained from the experience, and that at some level it changes the understanding of how we should be teaching jazz practically as well as theoretically. So again, this project was simply aimed to create a space of encounter and mutual discovery. And it was really a reciprocal set of ongoing encounters. Thank you for the beautiful music you made. And by the way, I will say to colleagues that we recorded the concert. And in fact, another wonderful educational part of the project was that it was our film and TV students who recorded and live streamed the concert under guidance as part of a course in learning to broadcast live performance. So we have raw footage of the concert available that we could share under controlled circumstances with interested colleagues. And we do hope to work with that and develop it so that we can release that, so that the wonderful musical work that was done can be more broadly accessible as well. So something that, as we start moving towards a close, and let's see if there are any other questions, maybe something that I should just add personally, and I'm always very cautious in this kind of conversation. This cannot be about myself, of course. It would contradict the whole project. But one of my students, Homotso, in fact, this week said, you also can't hide yourself in the project. So I've got to try and find that balance. So, like Samuel Araujo, I had the experience and the privilege of going to the United States to graduate school and to study ethnomusicology and to be able to attend ICTM and SEM meetings and so on and so forth. But the plan was never to stay there. The plan was always to come home and do the work where it needs to be. And in fact, what had sent me to graduate school was in part the kind of work that jazz appreciators do. When I was a very young, in my first job in my 20s, that's 30 years ago now, I was working at the State Theatre in Pretoria, the same town where we are today, and I organized some jazz concerts, and some jazz appreciators came to the concert regularly, and I got to know them. And so when I was thinking about a dissertation project, I was interested in what jazz could tell us about the South African transition for precisely the reason of the debate between Oladele and Mfanufikile, right? It's the inability for us to place this music in one of what my late friend Zimrawana called apartheid's ethnic cubicles. We can't put this music in one cubicle. And so I thought this jazz would be interesting for what it could tell us. And the more I was looking at what was happening in jazz post-apartheid, the more interested I became in this particular community of practice. And in fact, this community of practice has been expanding and reorganizing itself post-apartheid and creating, in my view, a grassroots public jazz sphere that has profound consequences for how we curate and fund and study the music in the country. So I came back with a PhD about this wonderful world of practice, but I have felt for myself that I cannot replicate the North American model of the jazz ethnography in the South African setting. It's needed to be a radically dialogical, convivial, to use Nyamjo's helpful term, way of going about this work that acknowledges and centers the voices of the practitioners. My role is simply to connect the dots and to really just recognize and make more audible and visible the creativity. So I've deliberately not published the monograph yet until it could go through a process that is as dialogically grounded as this process. So personally, I want to really thank the amazing range of people we've been able to work with on this project. Colleagues like Chantal and Andre, postgraduate students who performed, dancers and diggers who were in the audience and on the stage, students and colleagues who recorded the concert. And then I'm most encouraged by the fact that this beautiful collective has emerged, using its beautiful irony. So Simpiwe said, Cosmopolitanism is too clunky and academic a brand to attract a popular audience for. And so we went with Cosmology for the academic group, only to have our community-based non-academic partners choose Cosmopolitan to name themselves, which is really lovely. So we continue now to read together, to listen together. Here's a heads up. We think we might be able to do something, we hope, on World Jazz Day, which is the 30th of April. So that might be a next project we'll discuss now. We're going to adjourn after the session and have a meal together, as we tend to do, and talk about the next things we can do. We're looking for international thinking partners, collaborators, and people to build this network with. And so with that, I really want to recognize the wonderful privilege and opportunity we've had in sharing our work with you today. I want to thank Sui Beng and Carlos at the ICTM Secretariat. In the last moment or two, I'm going to really again turn the camera away from myself so that you can see there have been more members of our group arriving. We're going to move outside so that there's not risk of congestion indoors. And this work continues. So thank you to the ICTM for encouraging us to share our practice, our ongoing learning with one another. And I will turn the camera around the room so that people can say hello and goodbye and wave. And we really look forward to engaging with you in whatever fora we can do going forward. I'm going to put my email address in the chat if anyone would like to follow up afterwards. And with that, I think we can move towards conclusion. Weya, thank you so much for your lovely comment there. And I understand, Carlos, that these recordings will be made available on the ICTM's YouTube channel. Anything else anyone needs to say, logistically speaking? It's probably going to all be said in the chat. So as you know, we are multitasking on Zoom. I'm typing now, speaking, and trying to be coherent. But this has really been lovely. Thank you so much for being with us in this process today over these 2 hours, no matter what time zone you are in. Thank you very much, everyone. I mean, you might be able to unmute now so that we can at least hear your voices.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning to all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
a lot.
Excellent.
Yes.